Kentucky basketball is realizing that their struggles, while they may stink, have made them one of the best teams in college basketball as the season winds down.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we're going to talk about what hasn't killed Kentucky, has actually made them stronger. It's made them one of the best teams in college basketball as we wind down the regular season. Also on today's episode, going to discuss if Kentucky should stick with their rotation should certain players come back. What about next season? How do they handle the roster there? And then to wrap up the show, I want to talk about Kentucky football's schedule, because while they may struggle in terms of overall record, they can still be great in 2026. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, would love it if you subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also love it if you subscribe there on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. Play your game. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky's struggles have made the Wildcats one of the best teams in college basketball. Now, some of you may disagree with that, and I'll just go ahead and tell you, sound off in the comments if you disagree with their struggles making the Wildcats a better team. The woes that the Wildcats have suffered have actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise, and now currently they're playing like one of the best teams in the country. We talked about it yesterday on our bonus episode of Locked On Kentucky when we discussed the AP poll versus power rankings, how Andy Katz says Kentucky is the 14th best team in the country right now. I think compared to the national college basketball landscape as a whole, but even in the SEC, I think the Cats are playing really good ball right now. And it's kind of hard to argue against when you just look at straight up wins and losses. Again, 8 out of their last 9. They're rolling right now. They're playing at a top 20 level out of like 360 plus D1 teams. Now, will they finish playing like that? No one knows. We have no idea. This is one of the most volatile teams in the country. But again, their woes have turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Let's talk about some of those woes real quick, and we'll start with losing Jaland Lowe. The only point guard on the roster dislocated his shoulder 3 separate times before finally getting season-ending surgery, and this has been a blessing in disguise for the Cats because it's forced a couple of things. First and foremost, it's forced Denzel Aberdeen into the spotlight as Kentucky's lead guard, and he has thrived. In SEC play, he's averaging 13 points per game, shooting almost 40% from 3 and 3.1 assists per contest. He has been the answer that Kentucky has needed at point guard, and he's played pretty well, all things considered. And the fact that he's shooting almost 40% from 3 has absolutely helped this offense to have their lead guard be somebody that can consistently spray it from deep. It's also forced, the loss of Jaland Lowe, has also forced the offense as a whole to both find and stick with new answers. How are we going to distribute the ball consistently? Can Malachi Moreno become a more involved player in this offense passing the ball? Can Brandon Garrison work his way back into the rotation as somebody that can facilitate? Both those guys have been really sharp, actually, overall, when it comes to handling the rock and making the right decisions and reads in this Mark Pope offense. So I think it's forced Kentucky to consolidate and make themselves figure out how to run offense because their point guard's not coming back, and they've found a way to win despite losing Jaland Lowe. They've also found a way to win despite losing 3 starters as a whole. It ends up being a blessing in disguise because, again, it's forced Kentucky to be a more tough, resilient, cohesive unit. They're more cohesive as opposed to the start of the season. If you remember, the lineups felt disjointed. The rotations didn't make sense. Mark Pope was trying to figure out what worked, what didn't work. And the injuries, while they are terrible for these individuals, and I do pray for them and their families, it has forced Kentucky to answer how they should move forward with the rotation, despite, maybe some shortcomings that have made Kentucky struggle at times, even in SEC play, despite winning. The rotation used to seem confused, but now it feels like there is an answer. There is a consistency. There is a flow to what this rotation and the starting lineup looks like. There's forced clarity, is what I put in my notes, on who should play where. specifically at power forward, where Mohamed Diabate has now taken a bit of a back seat, especially early in game, to Andrea Jelic, who seemingly finds himself at the beginning of every highlight reel that Kentucky has posted throughout their winning streak, where he's getting a layup or a three to go early. He's been impactful. The recipe for success has been Jelic early, Diabate late. Whenever you need a bruiser, somebody that can come up with rebounds, and Kentucky, again, consolidating the rotation, finding answers for players at the right time, in the right times of games. And then the last thing as far as Kentucky's woes is them getting knocked down over and over and over, finding themselves in these large deficits early and getting back up to win within games. It's super rare to do consistently, but Kentucky has been more resilient. It's forced them to, I think, mature mentally. It's forced them to become not just more cohesive in terms of the personnel, but more cohesive in terms of energy, emotions towards each other as teammates. It's created a consistency and a gelling that you would have not otherwise gotten from this squad if they weren't pressured, if they weren't forced into a corner. And Pope has gotten the most, I think, that he possibly could have out of this group in terms of finding that resiliency, finding that backbone, finding that spine whenever you get down by 10 plus, you're finding ways to answer in the second half. So I think that getting down like this has definitely helped Kentucky's psyche. And then it's also helped, I think, just the confidence and the momentum within games that they know that they are better than maybe some of their starts, and they can really throw a huge punch possibly down the line if they're able to play a consistent game. We've already seen them do that on the road against Arkansas. So losing Lowe, losing three starters, finding themselves in huge deficits, all of these things that Kentucky has struggled with, I think has turned out to be, again, a blessing for the Cats in the end. They're playing like one of the best teams in college basketball right now. They're volatile but resilient. Will it continue? Go listen to yesterday's episode of Locked On Kentucky as I do a serious deep dive into what exactly we should make of this Kentucky team and computer models and just what we think of the Cats as a whole, because there's not a whole lot of answer or clarification as to what's going to happen, which is kind of fun. But at the same time, it's a little scary if you're a Kentucky fan. Should Kentucky stick with this rotation? What about next season? I want to give you a positive perspective on both Kentucky in the now and their recruiting for the future in just a moment. Before we do it, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Indeed. Hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the move, because instead of hoping the right person just stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria. I'm talking skills, certifications, and location. If I were hiring, I wouldn't just want someone who can help, right? I'd want someone with real experience who can jump right in. It saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches. And with sponsored jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit for you. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events that you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected on the action. If you want to stay connected with the men's and women's hockey team, if you want to stay connected with Jamaican bobsledding, which is also a thing that happens in the Winter Games that I just think is a beautiful concept, but super entertaining to watch. The Winter Games are on. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. There's no better way to follow the Olympics than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. All right, continuing along here on today's episode of the show, really appreciate you guys tuning in. If you have not subscribed, again, to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, you already make Locked On Kentucky your team every day. Now you can take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club to get today and get Locked On Kentucky with no interruptions. members only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or 50 buckaroos a year. Go to lockedonkentucky.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. Should Kentucky stick with their rotation? What about next season? What about recruiting? Considering the Cats don't have a single recruit, I want to give a positive outlook on everything happening right now because Kentucky's winning. And I think that there is far too much negativity within this fan base right now. And I think we should take a bit of a step back and evaluate, okay, we know all the ways things could go wrong. We know that. We know how this could turn south, both in the short and the long-term futures. But what if it goes right? How would that happen for Kentucky? Well, right now, I do think Kentucky needs to stick with their rotation, the 8 or 9 man rotation that they're playing, depending on the game. Right now, continuity and consistency is what this team needs. This is the season right here, these final few games. This is where crap gets real, whether we like it or not. The players that Kentucky has are working, they're winning, so why change anything? You're not adding Braden Hawthorne to this lineup. Jaden Quaintance, if he does return, would be a bench add. I would start Malachi Moreno, and I would play him and Garrison a large portion of the minutes. They're working at center right now. Why would you mess with what's working? So I think Kentucky needs to stick with their rotation for certain. What about next season? Well, I think there can be some addition by subtraction, sure, but there are so many different pieces that I think I could either buy into or I am excited about if they do decide to return to Kentucky for next season, most notably Malachi Moreno. Collin Chandler, I would also be excited about. Jasper, you could talk me into being excited about, especially with an offseason to develop physically. You could also talk me into some Cam Williams at small forward if he is able to get the three-point shooting going consistently, which we've seen healthy. I think he can be that. And then the positive note here for next season is that Kentucky's still not out of the race for Tyran Stokes. We've already talked about it on the show recently at length, so I won't go into insane detail, but Kentucky's not out of the race yet. There's still a chance. And if you get Tyran Stokes or a big fish in the portal, you can build around it. Before I talk about like what this roster could look like next season, I want to go into like some of the needs real quick. I do want to point out something. Kentucky doesn't have any 2026 commits, right? Which I think can be viewed as a bad thing. I think it's very fair to say, and I've said it, Kentucky's not recruiting. And this is arguably the easiest place to recruit in all of college hoops. And Mark Pope and company is struggling to do it. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. Which we've talked about before. We don't have time to get into today. However, this is on record as being, or projected to be, one of the weakest freshman classes in a while. The only player, according to a lot of scouts, people that know what they're talking about, a lot of people seem to agree that Tyran Stokes is the only really, really good player in this class. And outside of that, it's kind of a crapshoot. So if Kentucky doesn't get Tyran Stokes, they can still get somebody out of the portal. Or if they get Stokes, you've got 4 or 5 concrete quality players that you can pair alongside him, and you go into the portal and you round it out. Just because Kentucky doesn't have a commitment yet doesn't mean they're necessarily missing out, right? Now, they could end up missing out. Who knows? We may look up this time next season and say, wow, this freshman class was severely misevaluated. And there's a lot of players here that are much better at their respective schools than we expected them to be. But as of right now, that's not the case. Kentucky is expected to be honestly kind of fine if they don't get a large portion of their 2026-2027 production out of this year's recruiting class. And if you get Stokes, you can absolutely build around it. If you get a Yaxel Lindenberg type out of the portal, you can absolutely build around that. Now, you've got to go get him, but there's still hope there for next season's roster and their talent. You need a lead point guard If Jaland Lowe is not here next season, you need a lead point guard that has to be able to shoot. He's got to be able to handle the ball and shoot. Jasper has to be a part of the backcourt if he's going to physically mature. Honestly, if he takes a Rob Dillingham type leap, I could see him running point. I don't necessarily know if I'd be that fired up about it, but I could see it. Chandler and a backup shooting guard, I think would be really fun at the 2. A big-time scorer at the 2. Cam Williams or a portal stud at your 3. You need wing depth regardless, so you maybe get 2 guys here, one that can between shooting guard and the 3. You get a portal stud at your power forward. I think that's the biggest need for Kentucky. If they don't get Tyran Stokes, they need a portal stud at power forward to pair with Andrea Yelovich if he does return. And then, honestly, you could run back Malachi Moreno and Brandon Garrison, but also at the same time, if Garrison leaves, if Malachi declares, you need a portal defender and rebounder. You need a brute. You need a Somtos Cyril type at center. So you can build this into something special next season. Obviously, it's easier said than done. You have to go out and actually do it, but at least it's possible. So in the short term, I think Kentucky's okay. In the long term, I think they can be okay. That's a positive perspective on Kentucky's lack of recruiting. Now, I do want to give a little bit more of a sober-minded take for Kentucky football, because the reality of the situation is they might not get the wins next season to really get Big Blue Nation fired up. But any fan that watches a 6-6 or 7-5 type season could understand the Wildcats can still end up being a much better team than their record says they are, and honestly, a lot better than most of the country. Before we talk about that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Mazda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. The WNBA has released its 2026 schedule, featuring a 44-game regular season beginning on Friday, May 8th. The league's historic 30th season includes expansion teams Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo, with opening weekend highlights such as Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever hosting Paige Beckers and the Dallas Wings, and a rematch of the 2025 finals between the Aces and the Mercury. In college hoops, South Carolina handed Vanderbilt its first loss of the season with a dominant 103-74 win. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts the same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment. Putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
All right. Continuing along here on today's episode of the show. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Subscribe if you have not already. I would love it if you did so. Kentucky football schedule. Whew, it is brutal. It's a brutal schedule for the Wildcats next season. And yet, I think Kentucky can still be great in year one of the Will Stein era. In case you don't have it in front of you, Kentucky's schedule next season is as follows. They open the season against Youngstown State. Cool. Get an FCS program. Oh, Alabama comes to Lexington the next week. Okay. An Alabama team that's maybe not as good as some of the teams that Nick Saban had. Oh, you go to Kyle Field the next week after that. Texas A&M, top 15 team, top 10 team. Okay, some struggles, maybe early. South Alabama, September 26th. Hey, that's nice. That's easy. Oh, you go to South Carolina, October 3rd. Do you know how much pressure is going to be on Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks at that point in the season? There's a lot of pressure right now. They've got to do something to turn things around in Columbia. So that's a rough game, possibly. Kentucky may take some lumps. LSU comes to town October 10th. Lane Kiffin and the LSU Tigers, projected to be one of the best teams in the SEC, if not the best, strolling in after that. A beautiful start to the year where you have Bama, A&M, South Carolina. And if you think maybe there's a little bit of a reprieve before your bye game, welcome to Gaylord family Memorial Stadium in Norman, Oklahoma, where you play against the Oklahoma Sooners, who are bringing back some pieces and should be nasty on defense. And then you get Vanderbilt before your bye. And Vandy, I don't know what to make of Vanderbilt this season, but I'll tell you what, I'm glad Diego Pavia is gone, as are most of you. Thank goodness. Hopefully the quarterback that they have next, Jared Curtis, I think, is nowhere near as annoying. Hopefully he's a little bit more decent. Bye week at Tennessee, Florida at home, at Missouri, Louisville at home to close things out. Kentucky's got to steal one or two to get to a bowl. Honestly, I'm probably eyeing Alabama in week 2. I'm probably looking at this in week 2 and saying, you can go in there with a new scheme, with a whole lot of new personnel and stun Alabama week 2. Or you could stun LSU, or you could stun Tennessee, or you could stun Florida, Missouri, Louisville. I mean, you have to upset somebody. This is one of the toughest schedules in the country. On3 recently posted and said that it's one of the top 10. I think it's one of the top 5. It's definitely one of the most difficult in the SEC, because how many teams have to open up the first half of the season playing Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, Oklahoma? And before their bye, they've also got to go to South Carolina. And then, after the bye, as you close out October heading into November, you still have to go to Tennessee, to Missouri, who's been playing really well over the last few years. You've got Florida at home, newfound life there with John Summerall, and then you got your rivalry game in Louisville, and they've curb stomped you. Or they did last season. This is brutal. But we all know 6-6 or 7-5 or better out of this Kentucky team is insane success. Shoot, 5-7 with a win over somebody like Alabama would still be like, okay, we could see the signs. We can see what this team is capable of under Stein moving forward with Kenny Minchie at quarterback. Maybe they don't explode onto the scene in year 1. But Kentucky could still be much better than a large portion of the country. And it's just the nature of playing in the SEC, baby. That's the tough part about it. Now, I do trust Kentucky's what's going to establish Kentucky as a consistently competent team in year 1. I trust that they have that. The offensive and defensive lines, specifically the O-line, I trust to be the thing that establishes Kentucky with a baseline consistency to be just at least competitive in year 1. There's life because of what you've got going on in the trenches on both sides of the ball. We'll see if it holds, because again, this schedule is brutal and you don't know how injuries could unfold. 7-5 for me would be awesome. Anything better than that, which you're obviously striving for, the goal is to win every single game. Anything better than that is really, really sweet to think about for the long-term future. I'm not saying Kentucky's the next Indiana, because it's probably a little bit more difficult for a team to rise out of the ashes of the middle of the pack or the bottom of the barrel of the SEC as it is opposed to the Big Ten. And that's not a knock on the Big Ten. I think the Big Ten's top cream of the crop is the best in college ball right now. I just think the SEC is a deeper league. I'm not saying Kentucky's going to be the next Indiana, but darn it, they have the ability to do something over this next half decade. There can be a special run. Let me know what you think in the comments below. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.